Hi again, folks. Welcome to the Sabres Reloaded. This is the video on the channel that I go through topics within the organization. The topic is one of mine tonight, guys, and I'm going to throw probably a few clips down below. I might not. We'll see. You're going to hear it, so I don't think it's that necessary. I'm going to go over, guys, for me as a fan, okay? I'm going to go over my 5 biggest regrets, okay? Well, and I'm not trying to go from a positive to a negative, but these are just coming into the season, things that go through my mind, memories and hopes, dreams, and of course, painful memories of hopes and dreams shattered, you know? So, I'm gonna give you my 5 biggest regrets that I've seen as a fan. Number 5, last year, guys, I hate not knowing what the Sabres might have done if they got in the playoffs. That kills me. It just does. And I know I don't talk much about it and I move on from these things. But if I'm going to be brutally honest with you, that's one of those things that I just wish I wish they could have got in just to see. You know, and I would have loved to see Anderson and Nets and Levi and Nets together and see where they could have went. What could have happened maybe, you know? I'm not going to say they would have had a run like Florida. That's just stupid to say. I mean, it's possible, but Florida was more of a veteran seasoned team that was first overall the year before. That's a whole different thing. And they had a goalie that finally showed up for his contract, you know? So there was a lot of different things over there than us with paying a guy minimum that's like, you know, a kid in Nets and a veteran goalie who was at the end of his career. It would have been nice to see one last playoff run, of course, for RJ as well, right? So for me, last year has to cut this list now, and it probably will in the future too, guys. You know, so for me, last year is a regret. Number 4, 1983, the 82-83 Sabres, guys. I cannot believe it's 40 years ago that happened. The Brad Park goal. I still cannot believe that moment happened 40 years ago. You know, it's just like yesterday for me, guys. And a lot of you younger folks, believe it or not, 40 years when it passes, you're going to remember I said this and said, my God, you know, Wayne was right. The time is flowing by. Life and time passes by quickly, guys. And 1983, I had no expectation. I went to the first 2 games in Montreal with my mom, got tickets, and the Sabres won in back-to-back shutouts going back to Buffalo. Imagine that, you know, the mighty Habs, really. And it was just one of those things that you expected the Habs this time around to win the first round because they kind of like choked up previous years, you know, like 80-81, 81-82. I can't remember who they lost to in 81-82. Might have been Quebec. I can't remember, guys. Might have been Hartford. I can't remember. I don't remember who the Habs lost to that year. But I'm very sure that Montreal lost the first round, opening round, those 2 seasons. And this was like Montreal had a good year. I believe they were 98 points. The Sabres were 89. And I believe that the Sabres that year I didn't expect them to do anything. And they swept out the Habs. And the Habs still had like Lafleur, Robinson, Gainey. They still had a team. They still had a good team there. And I just didn't see it coming. And it was Scotty's kind of revenge series against the Habs, so to say, you know. And then we played the Bruins, who were one of the top teams in the league that year. I can't remember exactly where. I always say first overall, and I know I usually get that wrong. I believe the Penguins. Was it the Penguins? No, it was somebody else. The Bruins might have been first overall that year. I might be thinking of 93. Yeah, the Bruins this year were first overall. My bad. They were first overall. I'm 99% sure on that. Say 95. And here we have them on the ropes. We have them on the ropes. And we just continue to fight them in the series. It goes to Game 7 in overtime. And we had them twice in Game 7, 2-0 and 3-1. And we let it slip out of our fingers. And if you ever go check Brad Park scores in overtime, that's the goal you're going to see online. Broke my heart, guys. I can't tell you how badly. Because I knew if they went on to play the Islanders, we'd have the better chance to upset them than that older Bruins team. I knew the Bruins would lose in 6. They lost in 6. The Sabres, there was no way to know. It was a young squad. That's what was exciting about them. It's unpredictable what could happen now if they advance, and they didn't. So, and that was the closest Scotty ever got that rebuild to any success, was that playoffs. All right, number 3, 1980. Guys, the 79-80 Sabres, I was just talking about them in the last video. That for me was one of the biggest heartbreaks when they didn't win the Stanley Cup that year. And because in my opinion, we sacrificed everything breaking up the French Connection. I don't care how good John Van Boxmeer was, he was not René Robert. And to break up the French Connection for me was an unholy thought. But look, it was Scotty Bowman, and at the time, even in 1980, he was the man in the NHL, and you just are going to like go give him the keys to the city of Buffalo and say, look, do what you can with this squad. Please, you know, we're desperate for a Stanley Cup here, and it's already 5 years since we made the finals in 75, and we haven't even come close. And it just wasn't meant to be, you know. His first year in Buffalo, 110-point season. Sabres went nuts that year. If it wasn't for the Flyers having a 35-game unbeaten streak, they might have finished first overall that year. They probably would have. And they just, to come playoff time, ran into the future dynasty New York Islanders, who were finally ready to break through, who had a crap year. And I believe they finished 7-0-1, something like that, going into the final stretch. So did the Sabres, though, guys. I believe they were undefeated. I think they were 7-0-4 going into the playoffs themselves. The Sabres were rolling at the right time and everything. They ran into the Islanders. And the Islanders, as we've seen, won 4 cups in a row. They broke through that year. And when we were up 2-0 in Game 6, and then it was 4-2, and there was a minute left, I still believed we were going to tie that game. That's how much I believed in that team in 1980. And Pro turned it over to Bob Bourne, empty net goal, and that's when I knew, my God, they're not going to win the cup this year, you know? And yeah, it's still a regret. Number 2. The Hasek era, not winning a Stanley Cup with the greatest goalie in NHL history. And yes, I know that Patrick Waugh was great, Marty Brodeur were great, but Dominic Hasek, in my opinion, was greater. He was just one of a kind goalie. I don't know how Chicago traded him to us, but I'm still grateful to this day they did. And the Hasek era, to have no Stanley Cup, and we came close to 98. Remember Juno, Game 6 in overtime in Buffalo? Then Game 7, of course, the infamous no-goal with Brett Hull in 99, and it wasn't in the cards. You know, it wasn't in the cards. And to see him win a Stanley Cup in Detroit, yes, I was happy for him, but come on. They're winning cups without him. You know what I mean? It wasn't that big a deal, really, at the time. So for Hasek not to win it as a Sabre is a regret for me. That's one of those regrets I have as a fan. Kind of still drives me a little nuts, you know. I'm wearing his jersey tonight, you know, like, it just bugs me. So, okay, and number 1, I got the French Connection, RJ, Ted Darling, the odd equals no Stanley Cup. During that era, how the Sabres did not win a Stanley Cup kills me inside still to this day. And look, I was like, I wasn't old. I was like 12, 13, 14, 15 during these years, you know. And but it's a regret I still have. I love this team. I love this franchise. That's never going to stop. But I wish that those men all could have been part of a championship at the same time, and that building, you know. And that's another regret that's not even on this list, is I never got to see a game at the Odd, guys. That should actually be right up there. That might be more of a regret actually than last year, actually, now that I think about it. The Odd, me never getting to see a game at the Odd. I have a deep regret of that. But, you know, life chooses a path, and I guess, and I was just born here, you know. So yeah, not winning a Stanley Cup in that era, guys, for me is a huge thing. It's a big thing. And I don't know why it didn't happen, because when I think back to those fun times and that team and that crowd in Buffalo was as loud as anybody in the entire league. And, you know, they had one of the coolest names with the Memorial Auditorium, I always thought that was such a cool name. So many things, guys, I can say about that era that is a regret, you know. And of course, you know, I could have made a list of 10 things here, guys. The 83 kind of touches on the Scotty rebuild. You know, I could have talked about the Scotty rebuilds and other thing. But for me, the biggest regret, French Connection, RJ, Ted Darling, that era, not winning a Stanley Cup in that era, you know, that one hurts. So, all right, guys, done. I've yacked long enough. I'll see you in the next one.